chairperson of the KCA and one of our community reps for the Kinloch representative group. And I'd like to welcome you all here tonight for the information evening on Seven Oaks. I'd also like to welcome some of our guests here this evening. Wiari, Rahina and Kia, welcome. Also fellow Kinloch representative group members, Renee Mar, Yvonne Westerman and John. Yes, sorry, John Williamson. We have apologies from Kathy Guy, which is unable to be with us this evening. And I'd also like to welcome obviously our presenters this evening, so Phil Riley from Seven Oaks and Scott Davenport is here from the TDC to answer questions as the consents manager on the process that we have. Before we begin, I would like to invite Renee or Riari to do the karakia to begin our meeting, please.
Thank you very much for drawing the raffle ticket. I appreciate that. So with those few words, with the blessing of Jehovah Father and peace of His only truly begotten Son, Jesus Christ, e miha tēnei kia aia, me tēnei wā, kia whakamahanga i a koutou, ko ui mai nei ro te tēnei reo karanga o koutou. Nā reire e pā, muna kia mai kia mātou i tēnei wā, kia rātou ko ngā tūpuna ngaroa te pō, nā ka heitahara mai kei tautoki o ngā pōri. Dear Heavenly Father, we bless all of those who are gathered here tonight, and especially our loved ones who dwell beyond the veil of no return. May they forever remain within our hearts, and may they hold us true to the kaupapa tonight in which we're here to deliberate over. In the name of God's name, Amen.
So to begin this evening, I do have some apologies from Bridget Eddy and Karen Will. So I'm going to hand over to Phil to take us through 15 minutes now. On overview of the Seven Oaks.
Good evening, thank you all for coming along tonight. Hopefully won't take up too much of your time. I'm going to probably stand on this side, I think, so I'm not in everybody's way too much and I can reach the computer. So we're here to talk about Seven Oaks. Just thought I'd start with an overview of the scale and size of the Seven Oaks land. I brought a little pointer along to you, so perhaps I'm not in everybody's way too much. But this, so this is the Kinloch Bay, that's the end of the beach where the KCA track starts down through here. This white outline is the outline of the land that's owned by Seven Oaks, and within that structure, you'll see there's two squares up here. That's the land that was taken out of the block by Diane Comber for her children when she sold the block, unsold the block. So that equals, that's 34 hectares. Just by way of context, if you look at sort of the Lyland subdivision here, you can see that it's a similar comparable scale. Lyland's about 30 hectares. So it is a sizable piece of land within the Kinloch area. A lot of people think that they see Seven Oaks as being stage one, you know, the stuff that we're advertising at the moment, but there is a lot of land there to be as part of the overall development. I just thought I'd do a little bit of context in the district plan. So this is the Seven Oaks site in the district plan. You'll see the pink, the darker pink area is the area that's zoned Kinloch residential, which is exactly the same zoning as the rest of the village in the Lyland subdivision. And the area that's zoned a lighter pink is zoned Kinloch low density residential. So there is a change in density across the block in that area. That's straight out of the district plan. The application we've currently got in with council for subdivision is including all of the land within the residential zoned area only, the darker pink. So I won't be addressing anything on the low density residential area. That's a long way off in our plans and our horizon for any thoughts on that at the moment. So this is the area that we've called stage one. So there's Okaya Drive, there's the extension across the Okaya Gully that we've built, and there's the stage one development. If you've been up on site, just interested as how many people have been on site since it's been finished. Good. So most of you will have seen it and you have an idea what we're talking about. So that's the area that you see completed at the moment. The road comes up and it stops here. There's the construction site over here and the sales hut. What happens from there is you'll also see that we're advertising stage 2 for sale at the moment. Stage 2 includes a number of lots that head off down towards the south, and that's the area covered in blue. So the Okai Drive will come up into a large roundabout, and there's a large split lane carriageway, which we're calling at this point Seven Oaks Drive, which will have the main thoroughfare down to the rest of the block. And then in terms of the overall application that we've applied for, that's the total area that's in the current application. And you can see that that area, that line there, matches with the zone line that's in the district. So just, there's a little zoom in on that. So this is the plan for the current application. You'll see there's stage 1 that's been completed. That was a separate consent altogether. There were 29 lots in stage 1. And the rest of it is a plan for development of the balance of the block and up to 9 stages. There's a large, as I say, split lane carriageway that's planned to go right down the middle and terminate in a large turnaround area at the bottom, with 3 small cul-de-sacs coming off that to service various parts of the site. And then there's also a smaller interconnecting road that goes down and back up again. This is quite a low-lying area within the site. It goes down towards a natural low point. And so that's a different sort of, conceptually a different type of development area in there in terms of the views and the outlook from that site. We're planning a large reserve in the corner outside the roundabout, which will be combined with a stormwater pond to collect and treat stormwater and discharge that to ground, as well as a number of on-site recreational uses. I'm going to touch on those a little bit later on, some of our ideas for that, but it will be a combined recreation and stormwater reserve. There's also another small reserve down here, primarily stormwater again, and then more within this area in the turnaround area. So there's a large reserve area planned here, again stormwater pond for outlets, but also combined with a recreation type use as well. This large area in the middle is set aside as reserve. Now, when you look at the plan, it looks a little unusual as to why it's that shape. But when you go up on site, you can see that this is the top terrace of a bank, this line along here. The bank drops down to this lower lying area that I was talking about earlier. And so the plan is to fully vegetate all that bank with native species and to create a walking, cycling path through the middle. So there is plans within the development to create a lot of interconnecting tracks and walkways for walking and cycling, connecting through to the K2K track and then along the road alignments and through the reserves that we're creating. The other reason for some of this layout is to provide some interconnection, both for access for walking for the reserves layout, but also for ecological corridors. So there is a huge abundance of bird life in the scenic reserve bush around the site, and we need to make sure that's maintained, and we like to encourage that into and across the site. So you can see here that there's an ecological corridor from that bush site to this side, through some of those reserve linkages, and similarly down and heading out over to this side. So that's the basic philosophy behind the layout of the reserves and the walkways. Let's move on. Summary of the application. So we're calling it stages 2 to 9, as I know, because stage 1's already been completed. There's proposed to be 132 residential lots in stages 2 to 9, including the 29 lots in stage 1. That's a total of 161 lots in the residential zone. Now they are all fully compliant with the district plan rules, which requires them to be 800 square metres minimum and requires there to be a 1,000 square metre average. So that's fully compliant. And as a result of that, subdivision is controlled activity in the district plan. Under the district plan, and Scott may be able to comment on this later on, there's a blanket condition that says that the creation of any roads or infrastructure automatically becomes a restricted discretionary activity. So it doesn't matter whether your lots comply with the size or not. If you're creating roads or infrastructure, it's a restricted discretionary activity. So as a result of that, even though our subdivision itself is controlled, the application falls into a restricted discretionary activity because we're creating roads and sewers and water mains and infrastructure. There's a land use consent. So there's two consents, and correct me if I'm wrong, Scott, and other planners in the room, but there's two types of consents required. The subdivision consent, and then there's a land use consent if there's any aspects of the application which don't meet some of the performance standards that are listed in the district plan. We have three what I consider to be minor non-compliances with the performance standards, and as a result we need a land use consent to meet those. And I'll just go through those now. Before I just quickly go run through them, I just want to mention that in stage one there was part of the proposal in stage one was to reduce the setbacks from the scenic reserve to the building line of any houses. Under the district plan, and the performance standard requires 7.5 metres. We applied for and gained consent to reduce that down to 3 metres. We heard quite a strong message back from the community that they weren't happy with that outcome. So as a result, in the new application, all of the setbacks meet the requirement of 7.5 metres. So there are no reduced setbacks between the building line and the scenic reserve boundary. What the three performance standards that aren't met are as follows. So first of all, there's a front yard setback. So in the district plan, in the front of your house, between your house and your road, requires to have a 5 metre setback to the building. We're proposing to vary that, to allow that to go to 3 metres, in conjunction with some design controls on the building about having the garage set back 5 metres and stepped in line, so it's not having a blanket wall of building at 3 metres off the road boundary. I'm just going to go back and show you where that is. Oops, wrong way. And they're only applying to the 3 cul-de-sacs. So just around those cul-de-sacs, where they're very small neighbourhoods, we're applying to reduce that setback from 5 metres to 3 metres. The rest of the roads, the large spine roads, we're sticking with the 5 metre requirement in the plan. There's also a select range of building heights that's requested in the consent, ranging from 4.5 to 5.5 metres. Now that's still a single story, but it allows for a variance and range of building type and design. I'll touch on that more in a minute. And then in places there's a 7.5 metre building height which allows for 2-storey. I don't want to get into too much detail, but essentially the district plan performance standard requires that within 50 metres of the scenic reserve you're not allowed to have a house, or that it requires a house building height to only be 4.5 metres. We are applying for a specific layout of where we have 4.5 metres and 5.5 and 7.5 metre building heights. So not all of the 7.5 or 2-storey buildings that we're proposing don't meet that performance requirement, because if you're outside the 50 metres then you can go to 7.5 metres anyway. So wherever the site is hard up against the K2K track, we're staying with the 4.5 metres. To not have that feeling of when you're on the track that you've got houses that are overshadowing the track. But in other areas where the track isn't so close, we're looking at a change between 4.5 to 5.5, or in some cases even 7.5. And so they've been specifically selected site by site as to where we consider that to be an appropriate building height, for a number of reasons. One, some of this for visual effect, looking off the site onto the site. We don't have 7.5 metre building heights up on the central ridge line, so it's not sitting in a prominent space, and also for effect off-site in terms of being close to the boundary. So that's also been reviewed by a landscape architect who has agreed with our philosophy that that is an appropriate way to look at it. I'm going to come back to why we're doing that in just a minute and show you some examples of what we mean by that. But the third area that's not meeting the performance standard is the need to undertake earthworks greater than 0.5 metre depth within 7.5 metres of the reserve. So the performance standard requires that within the 7.5 metre building setback, you should only do earthworks up to 0.5 metre deep, whether it's cutting down 0.5 metre or building up 0.5 metre. And the difficulty that we have is that if you've been up on site and specifically walked around some of the undeveloped areas, for example stage 2, you'll find that the site is very up and down, it's undulating across the whole site. And so we find that ground shape changes right up to the reserve boundary. So to be able to create a flat building site that's consistent with the reserve boundary height, there are places where we just have to be able to cut or fill more than 0.5 metre because there's already a hill or a hollow there that's more than 0.5 metre deep. So that is unavoidable from our perspective. But what we have done in the application is put in there a full earthworks design plan. So that shows full proposed finished contours for the whole site. So you can see, if you look at that in detail, you can see in the council who are assessing that can see whether the ground form is proposed to be much lower or much higher than the boundary, which it isn't. It's proposed to match in with the scenic reserve boundary. But that's just because of that, the wording of that performance standard, we have to get consent to exceed that. So because of those three non-compliances with the performance standards, the land use is a discretionary activity under the district plan. So there's 2 consents that are required. I just want to make the point that the application is precluded from public notification under the RMA. So that's a legal RMA status requirement, that if it's a residential activity, then it's precluded from public notification. Right, so I want to just have a chat about these building heights, because that's some of the things that people seem to latch onto as being, oh, you're having 2-storey buildings and that's, it's not necessarily a good thing, or you're exceeding the 4.5 metre height. So the 4.5 metre building height, what happens is you end up with a number of buildings which are essentially very similar, because to achieve a 4.5 metre building height you just have to have a very flat single slope roof with flat pitch, and so you'll end up with a whole heap of buildings which look essentially very similar. Now in some places, as I say, where it's right up hard against the KCA track, absolutely that's appropriate. You don't have a question with that at all. But where it's not, what we're saying is that if we propose up to 5.5 metre heights, what you end up with is a much more larger range of building types. You end up being able to have a gable pitch roof, for example. It's only another metre higher, but what you end up with is a much larger variance of building type. We think that's a good thing, because you don't want to have a whole heap of buildings that look the same. So you can kind of see the examples there. Even with 5.5 metres, you can still have a single flat pitch roof, but it's steeper. You can go higher. So you can get a variance of buildings sitting in the landscape. The 7.5 is allowing for double storey, and so that can be achieved. You could have a single storey with a larger gable roof, an attic space or something like that, or you can go up to a 2-storey with a flat roof, generally for 7.5. And so we just think that that's actually good urban design principles, to have some variance in the type of building that's being allowed for up there. Interestingly enough, if you go and have a look at the buildings that are built largely along the Oakaya Reserve in the Lyland subdivision, you'll find a large variance of house types and building types already existing along there. Some of them are low pitch, some of them are gables, some of them are even 2-storey, right on the boundary with the reserve. Now I'm not saying I think that's a good thing. If you go and have a look at it, see what you think about how that fits within the environment, I think you'll find that it's actually working quite well. So that's the reason behind applying for those different building types, building heights. The need for 0.5 metre earthworks. Well, I've just put in a couple of photos here just so you can get an idea of what we're up against when we're developing this. So this, anything that you see as bush around the site is all scenic reserve. Our land is all the farmland up to the bush line. And so you can have a look here, you can see quite easily that there's a huge variance of terrain and topography up against that bush line. And the 7.5 metre probably comes out to about here somewhere. So there's just a need to have to be able to earthwork greater than that requirement. Here's another one. This is looking back up towards the Oakdale subdivision when it was under construction. You can see right along the boundary there's all this up and down that we're dealing with when we're doing the development. So that just gives an example of why we've applied to exceed that rule. So that's basically a rundown of the development and our proposal. Just summarising, the subdivision is fully compliant with the district plan in terms of densities and lot sizes and the number of lots. And there's those three minor non-compliances in the land use consent. I now talk about financial implications because there's a lot of, I often hear through communities that developers and developments cause a financial strain on the community resources. I just want to be able to try and set that a bit straight because every infrastructure upgrade that is required to enable a development to happen is paid for by the development. It's not paid for by council, it's not paid for by the community. So for example, to enable Seven Oaks to happen, there's a number of off-site upgrades that we've had to do in the infrastructure. We had to, the amount of Okaya Drive that crosses the gully, the stormwater from that ends up in the Lyland Pond, the stormwater pond. So we had to calculate the amount of increase of water in that pond, and we paid for an increase in planting and landscaping around the margins of the pond to allow for that increase in stormwater and to be able to deal with that. In terms of power to the site, the power for Seven Oaks had to be brought in from the substation outside the Tributary Marine place. So that's been brought right into the site. There was a cost of $300,000 to bring that power into the site, fully paid for by the developer. With stage 2 and beyond, the sewage from stage 2 will drain down Okaya Drive into the existing pump station in Lyland Drive, be pumped to the treatment plant from there. There needs to be an upgrade for the storage capacity of that pump station, and that will be built by the developer with stage 2, fully paid for by the developer. So all, those are just three examples, all infrastructure that's off-site that needs to be upgraded, paid for by the developer. But there's also, so yeah, I just talked about those there. So as a result of that, there's no cost to the council or the community for that, for the developments happening. And I'm saying developments as a whole, not just Seven Oaks. Oakdales, Lock Eagles, they're all the same. They've all paid for their off-site infrastructure. But what there is as well, in addition to that, is a contribution that developments need to make to the wider council infrastructure. So you might say, okay, it's good that you're upgrading your little pump station there, but that then gets pumped to the wastewater plant, which has just gone through a big upgrade, and they're putting in new irrigation in the golf course and all that, and that's all the cost to the community. So all developments are required to pay a development contribution in one form or another, which it has different names, but it's all essentially they pay a standard per lot charge to the council to contribute their costs of the off-site infrastructure. So I just wanted to put that in there, that the current costs that Seven Oaks are paying to council per lot is shown there in those lists. So there's a water supply contribution, $4,000 essentially in round numbers. Wastewater, $9,200. Reserves, that's for local reserves in terms of reserve upgrading in the Kinloch area. That's $1,400. This is all per lot. And district-wide parks, so that's a contribution to the parks in the Taupo district as a whole, the running and upgrading, and this is all set out in the district plans, the standard charges. And then transportation as a whole to the district is close to $5,000. So that all totals $20,600 per lot that gets paid by development when before titles are issued. So over 161 lots, our development alone will be paying $3.3 million to the council for off-site infrastructure upgrades. So just hopefully that clears up some of the comments that developers cost the community, because I assure you that they don't. So finally, I just wanted to end on a sort of a positive note about where we see this development going. We have a vision for what sort of things we want to put into Seven Oaks. My background is as a civil engineer, and I've specialised in subdivision development for the past 30 years, working as a consultant. I've worked for a number of developers and at times I've been disappointed in the outcomes of those developments because the developers often want to just put in the minimum and then say, well, the rest of it can be left up to council or the community. I've done my bit. And I find that disappointing. I've often been involved with developments where we've put in a big reserve and I'll say to my client, can we put in a swing or a slide or something in this big bit of grass? Well, it's not our job to do that, we're just going to leave it to council. And I have to say, more often than not, they're out of town developers. So this project is made up of a consortium of local partners. So there's myself, there's Bruce Bartley, who's done Loch Eagles, and I hope you agree that Loch Eagles has gone above and beyond in terms of the landscape and planting, at least that I've put up there, and the tracks that are being built within the development and also externally in terms of its contribution to the W2K track. Graham Say, who's an owner of Say Earth Movers in town, and Anthony Mitchell, who's a local who lives in Taupo as well. And we have a mandate within our shareholder agreement that we are going to go above and beyond. We're going to put more into our development than has been done in the past. So stage one has given us a little bit of a chance to do that. It's a fairly constrained site, but for example, we've planted out at stage one, we've planted over 2,500 plants, trees and shrubs in the area. I just want to talk about some of the things we've done out there that kind of gives an example of how we want to take a step up. I'll start with the swale over here. I'm not sure if anyone been up there in the rain and seen it running. Go up there, it's quite cool. There's a little river running down the side of the road. Now the purpose of this is a number of things. This is actually to filter and treat stormwater before it gets to the discharge point, but it also enables us a chance to put in a landscape feature down the side of the road. Now we didn't have to do that. We could have put it into a pipe, and a pipe would have been cheaper. But we think that treating the stormwater, giving a degree of, a more landscape amenity in the area and the street we're creating is a good thing. So we put that in place. That comes down to the end where there's a series of 3 stormwater ponds. That's for collection and treatment. That's being designed over and above the minimum standard in terms of the volume it collects and the volume that it discharges to ground. And also there's a connection out to the KCA track. Now, we could have just put a little gravel walkway along the side here and connected out to it, but we decided we wanted to do something a bit different, a bit unique, and so we've built this big boardwalk over the top. So the plants go up, you'll feel like you're walking through a bushed area over those stormwater ponds out to the track. Little examples, another one here where there's a lot of trees and planting down the connection between Oakleaf Lane and stage 1. All of this is above the minimum that's required. And going on from here, I talked earlier about some of the reserve spaces that we're creating and some of the walkways we're creating. We have a vision of being able to put more into those spaces than has been done necessarily in the past. So some of these that I've got down the bottom are just sort of examples. I've been going around the country and I look at different things and I think, oh, that's pretty cool, maybe we could do something like that. I have a vision to try and put in some nice sculptures within the site. I mean, you might not like that, not everyone likes the same thing, but I thought that was pretty cool. That's in Christchurch. But if there's local sculptors that want to put some artworks up and things like that, then we want to hear from them because we'd like to put that in place. Again, in Christchurch, there's a really simple but quite effective little asphalt pump track that the kids use with their skateboards and their bikes, and they ride around on it. Something a bit different from their normal swing and slide. Of course, there's this standard basketball court. This is in Kawhia. There's a little skateboard area for the kids, not really the big teenage ones, just a little one. And some street furniture. And this is in Napier. I've got a lockable bike storage area, so if you ride down there and you want to go for a walk, you can lock your bike and then you come back and unlock it again. And this is also one which I was really taken with in Kawhia. I'm not sure if you've been there, but this is a sculpture that's been put up in a combination of partnership between iwi and the local European population in Kawhia. And on one side, the carving and the tablets on either side tell the indigenous Maori background and heritage for the area, and on the other side, it tells the European history for the area. To me, that shows good working together and partnership. part of that, we have had some discussions with iwi about acknowledging the Indigenous history for the area, looking at putting in some storyboards in terms of what is the background to this site, how did we recognise what's happened here in the past, and I see that as being a storyboard walk throughout the development in terms of some of the walkways and along the reserve areas, and stopping to read each one as you educate yourself as you go through. So I'm carrying on those discussions at the moment. So I just want to kind of end with that. So it's sort of my vision to take it a bit notch higher. We also have, as part of our shareholders agreement, a mandate in there that we contribute to the local community. So a certain percentage of every stage of construction costs we are earmarking for contribution to local community projects. So we've been involved with a few to date. We've given a few contributions to the Whangamata stream upgrade. We've contributed to the security camera. There's been a couple of others I can't quite remember at the moment, but anyway. The Kinstock, we've been a sponsor of Kinstock, the Kinloch Triathlon, we've been a sponsor of that for the past few years. So I'm actively having discussions with Belinda quite regularly about what the community's wish list and needs are in terms of any involvement we can have with sponsoring or providing financial assistance to some of those projects. So I just want to leave you with that sort of vision, and I open it to everyone in the community. If you see ideas, if you have ideas about what you'd like to see on the site, and you think would fit in with it, by all means, please get in touch with me, because I don't have all the ideas, and the more people contributing those, the better. We do have to feed those ideas through the council. They look after these spaces at the end of the day. But I've already had some discussions with Andrew Moore and the reserves team around our vision, and they seem very excited about that. So there's ways it can be done without costing a lot in terms of maintenance. So that's pretty much me.
Cool, thanks Phil. So we are going to hear from Scott, I think, just a little overview of the consent process. But just before we do that, big apologies to everyone, especially to Tim Britton. Apologies Tim, I didn't acknowledge you here. So just so everybody's aware, I know sometimes it can seem complicated. We have a Kinloch Community Association who's hosting here tonight. And then in 2017, as part of a community plan work we did, we identified a need to get closer connection to council, and we took that to the TDC at the time, and out of that was born the Kinloch Representative Group. So, and our representatives here tonight is Tim and myself from the community side. Renee is our Māori representative on there, and then we have 3 councillor representatives on there, Yvonne, John and Kathy. So just sort of clear that up. Also, if anyone has an objection, just be aware we are filming this evening, so we've kept a record of it, because we know not everybody can be here, but we can make that available if anybody needs to. Oh yes, and I want to say thank you to everybody who's contributed to our security cameras. We are nearly at $23,000 of our $25,000 goal, so many thanks to everybody who has contributed to that. I think we have some flyers towards the back if you have missed that opportunity to contribute there, that would be great. And so then I'd like to come on to Scott. And I just wanted to take 1 minute before I let Scott speak to say thank you, because Scott and the team at the TDC have worked all the way through lockdown. You know, we saw many people here able to enjoy lockdown, if you like, and Kinloch was certainly, I am grateful that it was the place we were able to spend lockdown. But you know, Scott and his team worked all the way through, and so thank you for that commitment, and thank you for being here tonight outside of work hours.
Cool, no problem. Well, kia ora everyone. Thank you to you for being ratepayers. It's paid for my salary. Hence I don't get a choice not to work. Yeah, so for those who don't know me, Scott Beavenport, I'm the Consents and Regulatory Manager. So I look after the resource consents team, but also the building consents team, the liquor team, and the health team. So I sort of deal with pretty much all the regulatory fund functions that people have to apply for with council. My role tonight is really just to answer questions. Phil's covered off pretty much most of the things I was going to talk about, so he's done quite a good job, as an engineer particularly. But just quickly, just a couple of highlights through there that are probably worthwhile just re-mentioning or just expanding on a little bit. One of the ones that you briefly mentioned was around that public notification. So for those of you, most of you have a pretty good understanding of the Resource Management Act, and one of the key parts of the Resource Management Act is about community engagement, bringing people together and dealing with those environmental effects. And sometimes that means that simple consents go through a very simple process, and more complicated consents go through a full public notification process. And a good example of that is the hotel in town. So it's, people have known about it, went through a big public process, was appealed, went through to the Environment Court, so that was a long, drawn-out process, but there was lots of engagement in that process. What happens when National did the last rejig of the Resource Management Act is they basically took that public notification process out of residential development. So basically what they said is, if you're land zoned for residential and you're coming into a residential subdivision, you shouldn't have to re-litigate the fact that it's residential, which is what we've got here. So the fact that when we did the structure plan for Kinloch in the early 2000s, and we looked about future growth needs in the town, and we rezoned areas through that process to residential, this is one of those areas. And so most of you will probably be relatively familiar with the structure plan and the intention for Kinloch to be kind of high density towards the lake, so the residential sort of band, and then a low density band, and then a sort of a more rural residential band as you get right to the outer edge of Whangamata Road. So that's pretty much is kind of what's happened. Not exactly as that how the structure plan anticipated it, but there's certainly, as you drive out, you can see that density reduces as you go out. And in some cases, like the Poplars development, they've got smaller lot sizes, but they've got large areas of balanced land around it. So it's just a different way of doing it. It's the same sort of density. I also managed the development contributions, so I've talked a little bit about that as well. And Phil gave a really good rundown of what those costs are, but there's two costs that developers that they incur. Those are the ones that they need to do directly on site, off site. So when Phil spoke about pump station upgrades and those kind of things that are required to do, the developer actually has to pay for that themselves, and then they also pay the development contribution on top of that. So when you think about development contributions, in effect it's like buying the capacity that councils provide in that system. And the way council generally works, and I know you've had some issues with infrastructure in the last summer, but generally council plans towards the future, and we say for the next 2, 3, 10 years, 20 years, we've got a bit of an idea of what our growth needs are, and so we'll build that growth generally before it happens. So it depends how fast that growth happens, but we'll plan for it in advance, build it, and so therefore the ratepayers will basically purchase that asset, and then we'll basically pay that off through development contributions. So that's how development contributions work generally. If there's any questions about that, you can follow them my way. The other thing about development contributions that's quite important to understand is those things that are specific for that community, so water, wastewater and reserves must stay within that catchment. So when Sevenoaks pays for their water development contribution, it has to stay in that catchment for Kinloch, so it can only be for the benefit of that community. There's a couple of other ones that do go to the broader community, so district-wide parks is another one. So that we've only got a few district-wide parks, and that's things like Owen Delaney Park, the lakefront reserves, Tongariro Domain's another big one. So those are our big parks that kind of everyone from the community and visitors use quite regularly. And the last one is transportation. So transportation, because of the way roading networks work, you can't say that someone in Kinloch only uses roads in Kinloch. So we fund that right across the entire district. And so that funds things like the ETA, the council contribution towards that. It's going to fund one of the biggest projects in at the moment is the second bridge across the Waikato into town. So that's a big project we brought in the last long-term plan. And so that made the development contribution increase quite significantly for that. So that's one of those projects that while you live in Kinloch, you still drive into town. So those upgrades to Whangamata Road, Poihipi, all those kind of things, that's what that money goes towards to fund. What else do I talk about? Reserves. So the development contributions for reserves. So there's an agreement where we work with the developer about how they provide reserves. And so in the case of Sevenoaks, there's a bit of a mix of reserve land that sits within it. So some of it's recreation, some of it's stormwater, and some of it will just be scenic reserves. So we reached an agreement as we're going through that process about which of those reserves contribute towards the wider community good. So therefore, should they get a bit of an offset for some of that money? And if we don't consider that they're adequate, or they meet the needs, or the money that they pay should go towards other reserves, then council will actually purchase land and develop those reserves to meet the community needs. So we've got quite an interesting district plan in the fact that we don't actually have any requirement to make developers provide reserves. All we can do is basically either reach agreement through subdivision process or take money off them, and we'll basically purchase them in the places that we think the community needs it. What else was I going to talk about? That's the key things really. Phil's run through the key matters that needing resource consent for. So like I said, there's the subdivision consent, which is basically carving the land up into lots, and then there's the land use component, so that's what sits on top of the land. The other part that Phil didn't talk about was the regional council. So regional council deal with discharge to land, so they deal with the stormwater discharges, they deal with earthworks in sensitive locations, and so generally in large developments there's requirements to work with the regional council as well. In some cases they might need a resource consent, or they can do work that's what's called permitted activities, so basically means they comply with what the rules are, which I think in your case you generally most.
Yeah, sorry, this is a bit of an oversight. I didn't talk about that at all, because all the work we're doing is falling under the permitted activity rules. That doesn't mean we don't have to work with the regional council officers in terms of implementing our earthworks and our stormwater controls during earthworks. I think that's all part of the conditions of the permitted activity rules. It just means we don't need to get consent to do that work. So our stormwater discharge and our earthworks, which is primarily the regional council functions, all fall within those permitted activity rules.
Yep. So one of the key things as we go through the consent, I'll just explain to you where the consent's currently sit at the moment. So an application has been made to council, a formal application. The moment that it hits our door, that becomes basically public information. So I'm pretty sure I sent that information out to the KRG and KCA representatives pretty much the day I hit my inbox. So we sent that out. One of our agreements with KRG is about transparency, so we ensure that significant consents out here we forward on, so the communities are aware of what's going on. We then make an assessment on the application to make sure that all the information in there is pretty much what we would expect an application to have. So in this case, Chill's lodged application, we've considered that it's got adequate information to be accepted, and then basically we've got the one chance in the process to ask for further information. And as Phil spoke about, one of the key things that we've asked for more information is around landscape effects. So what do those building heights mean in terms of that wider landscape effect onto the dock boundary, those kind of things. So there was a landscape assessment undertaken, but we've asked for that to be done by an independent, and once that's lodged with council, we'll actually undertake a peer review of that to ensure that we feel that it's been gone through a robust process. So that's quite normal. It's a normal process that when we're getting expert reports in that we don't have the experts in-house to basically assess, we'll send it out for a peer review that is selected by council to ensure it's seen as a neutral and robust process. The only other one we've asked about, I think, is the earthworks. There's just some clarity around that. So those are the only two questions we've asked in terms of the application to get some clarity. So basically, where the application sits at the moment is it sits on hold until that information is provided, the peer review is done, and then we'll start processing again at that point. So it's really crucial for us that those timeframes are quite tight. We've got 20 working days from the time the consent's granted through to the time that we approve it. But those times that it's on hold are excluded within that. So the purpose of those timeframes is that once it's in with the council, basically you should get on with it, process it, deal with it, make a decision about notification, and go through whatever pathway that goes down.
Well, thank you very much. I think that's probably covered loads of areas, but I'd like to open the floor to questions now. So if when you're asking questions, we do have a protocol if you mind standing. If you could give your name and then the question clearly, that would be great.
Hi, Melissa Davidson. Just in regard to the new road going up over the stream, are you guys going to clear out the mess underneath it a bit to allow that stream to flow better? Because when it was done, it was just lots of stuff dumped under there, and it's pushed through a little bit with the rain, but it's nowhere near what it was.
Okay, that's actually a requirement of the regional council to fill the culvert, a third culvert. It's a requirement. There's a New Zealand Fish Passage Guidelines document that we've worked to in conjunction with the regional council. And there's a whole heap of requirements and sort of guidelines in there about how to encourage fish passage up through culverts. And one of those is to make the bed of the stream as natural as possible and not a concrete culvert. In the old days, we used to put concrete culverts in and put all these little concrete blocks to try and provide eddies in the flow for fish to go up. That's kind of not taken as being quite so effective now. So the approach now is to try and make the culvert as natural as possible.
It's not the culvert, it's on either end of it, especially the downward stream end.
It's actually blocked.
It's blocked.
How do you mean it's blocked?
It's
Actually,
shut.
doesn't flow. The actual stream bed has been interrupted. And there's a lake there. I do the traps up the stream,
Mm-hmm.
and I've got to climb up and over.
Yeah, yeah.
It's yay deep.
Yep, and that's part of the design.
Part of the design, yeah. But it doesn't actually flow into the stream bed properly. If it was flowing the stream bed properly, you would be able to walk, probably get through there quite comfortably without getting your feet too wet.
Okay, so I just want to talk about the culvert. It's not intended as an underpass. Okay, it's a stream flow culvert. And there's a large amount of engineering and scientific design around how to design culverts for fish flow and for water passage during storm events. And there's a large amount of rock riprap in the outlet of that culvert, which is specifically designed for the size of the rock, for the level of the rock in relation to the culvert, and for it to provide a stilling basin for any water flowing out of the culvert. So it's not actually a mistake.
Okay.
That was required by the regional council to design it and build it that way, and it's been signed off by them as meeting the requirements.
It does significantly interrupt because there's an excellent trail up that stream, and further on from there, it's been opened up very nicely by people who are building.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's an excellent walkway. It's just your things are kind of in the way.
Okay, I wasn't
There's
expecting this.
discharge rubbish underneath it as well. So
I wasn't expecting this question, and I'm just going to take a little bit of time to address it because it is quite important that you understand the background to the crossing of the Okaya stream. In our original application